Hello, in this video we are going to cover functions, and we've actually been using functions quite a bit. In Python we've just been using the built-in ones, but we can actually create our own. So the benefit of creating functions, it allows us to encapsulate code, and if we need to reuse that code several times in different locations, we just call the function name, also referred to as methods, and it just runs that code. So one, it reduces the amount of code you need to write. Two, if you need to update the code, the actual functionality, let's say, you don't need to update it in, let's say, 10 different locations where you have used it. It's updated in the original function, and it just propagates throughout your application. So the syntax of a function is like this: def, so just short for define, specify your function name. So the function name, I'm just going to call it awesome function. It is an awesome function. Then you just open close bracket. You can specify parameters as well. We'll cover that very soon. And now you just put a colon at the end. Make sure it's indented, because that's how Python knows that all the code belongs to this function. And now you just do what you want to do with the function. So if I were to, let's say, say if I just did print. So if I just printed something really simple. So if I just printed hello world, and let's say if I printed something else. My name is Bob, and no, I cannot fix it. And then at the end, it just needs to have a return statement. This just returns a value to the point where the method was called. You don't need to have a value always return, so you can leave this as default. But as you can see, once the Python ID knows that you've got a return, clicking enter will redent it, or I think that's going to sort out the indentation. So if I were to do, say, awesome function, this is how you call it. You do awesome function, open close bracket, specify any parameters. As we don't have any, we're not going to specify any. So if I run it, see what we get. So hello world, my name is Bob, and I cannot fix it. And if I were to duplicate this several times, it will run it several times. We'll show you that in a second. Another thing that we can add is like just essentially a function doc string, and this is just like, you can think of it as like some sort of description of the function. So if I would say this function is awesome, and so yeah, I'm just going to don't want that. And if we run this, we should get this printed out 3 times. So we have simplified 6 lines of code, because it would be 3 times this, so it'd be 6 in total, to 3 lines. You might be thinking, but there's still technically 5 lines, and then you got this as well. But obviously, the more complex you get, the more time you use it, the more beneficial it becomes. That's how you call a function. So now let's have a look at passing a value in. So if I create another function, so if I do def awesome function 2, and I want to call this number, you could specify multiple values and just separate it by a comma. So I'll call it number 1, number 2, and in here the doc string, I'll just say adds the numbers together. So this will add the number together. Obviously this is a very simple operation, but you get the picture. And let's say if you could either store it in a variable and return that, but we can just do return and just do it in line. So we just do number 1 plus number 2 something. I'm missing something. What am I missing? I feel like why is the indentation not working the way I want it to? So I'm returning a value, Okay, let's take a look at this. The indentation wasn't working, but it might just be this IDE, for example. So if we go back and we just print out, so we're going to print out awesome function 2, specify two values 5 and 6, and see what we get. So we get 11 because it's added to them together and returned it. So it returns it back to the point at which it is called, which is here. So it's the same thing as putting 11 there. That's the best way you can think of it. So there's a bunch of other things you can do with functions as well. And when passing in values or parameters, you can pass them by reference or by values. All parameter arguments in the Python language are passed by reference. So it just means if you change, what a parameter refers to within a function, the change also reflects back in the calling function. So that's just something to bear in mind. So if I were to do def change function, and I'll just call this number 1. And again, this does not conflict with this because this has local scope. This can only be used within this variable. So if I have a variable here, assigning a value of 5, and if I were to print out var1, now in here, if I did change function, again, this docstring is optional. Now if I did not var1, number 1 equals 8, and now if I just did return, so we're not actually returning any value. If I print out var1 again, let's see what we get. So we get 11 and 5 and 5. So what has happened? So let's take a look at this. So we had a value of 5 assigned to it, and then we passed it in. So the argument was passed in like so, and it worked, fine. I think I may have said it passed in by reference, passed in by value. If you pass in something like a dictionary, for example, or some sort of other sequence, that will get passed in by value, and you can modify it. That will, have modifications that affect the previous original variable. So as an extra task, check that out. And I think that, again, that was just a mistake on my part between the reference and the value. So like I said, you can have parameters, also known as arguments, and we have one right here. You can have as many as you want. You just separate it by a comma. It is really that simple. You can also have default arguments. So if, for example, we did def default arg, let's say if I had var1 in here, and if I do equals 8, for example, that means if you do not assign a value, if you do not pass in a value, it will just pass in 8. So what we're going to do is return the value, so var1 times by 2. That's all we're going to do. And now we're going to print off default arg, and we're going to pass in a value of 9. So we're going to do the same, but this time we're not actually going to pass anything in. And let's see what we get. So we get 8 and 16. So what do we get there? So with the first one, we passed in a value of 9. So var1 got overridden with 9. 9 times 2 is 18. But the second one, we didn't actually pass in a parameter. So we had a default parameter of 8. 8 times 2 is 16. Hence why it got printed out like that. As an extra task, I want you to have a look at what happens if you don't have a default argument. So it's just like var1, for example, but you don't pass in a parameter. But you will get some sort of error. And the other thing to bear in mind is if you are creating multiple arguments like this, for example, all default arguments must be at the end. That's just something to bear in mind, because otherwise the compiler won't know the first parameter is it for which parameter is it for, which argument. So again, that's something to bear in mind. The return statement is really useful as it's return value, but you always need it, but you might not always specifically use it to return some sort of value. Another thing I want to cover is global and local variables. And a global variable such as, let's say, var global equals 1, for example, can be used in all of these methods. That's a global variable, and as the next test point to try using it, you just do something like var global, and you can use it, and you could assign it something, you could just use it for mathematical operation. But variable that are created inside, like number 1, for example, is only limited to the local scope. That's again something to bear in mind. Whether it's created here, or whether I create a number 2 here, so the value of 9, that has pure local scope. So that means I can't use it outside of the method here, or in another method. So make sure you understand the difference between local and global scope variables. So that's it for this video. There's quite a bit more to it with function, but again, they're just extra nuances. I'll provide a link with this video so where you can check all of that out. But if you're comfortable with everything we've covered in here, you're all good to go. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next awesome functional video.